Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode on Fit as a Fiddle. I am super excited to have our guest here today. She's a friend from the opposite side of America, so she's joining us from the West Coast. Her name is Sej Saraiya, and she's an award-winning ethnographic and fine art photographer and filmmaker. She's spent a lot of time in remote areas like Asia and the Americas, and she's captured a lot of amazing videography and photography pieces of, the Indigenous women and these remote cultures. So we are super excited to hear all about that. And I'm genuinely curious to know about your experiences because I think it's such a cool thing to do. And I don't think a lot of people think about it or put themselves out there in the work that you do. So welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Sneha. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to share stories with you and the
Absolutely.
audience.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so first I want the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your journey, into filmmaking and photography and what kind of inspired you to specifically work with the communities that you capture?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been a photographer since I was 10 years old, which was when I got my first film camera. So it's always been, for me, photography has always been a way to pause the world around me and pause time and really just be very immersed in what's happening around me. So I used to do a lot of landscape photography. I also studied film at USC, but I was at this lecture by this amazing ethnographer and ethnobotanist by the name of Wade Davis he's a Canadian incredible National Geographic explorer in residence who has spent a lot of time with very remote cultures around the world, especially in the Amazon. And he was sharing stories about these people and how they live so differently from the way we do and how they think so differently. And with every story that he was sharing, it felt very familiar to me and my own way of living and thinking. And I was very intrigued, and I realized that I needed to go spend time with these cultures. And it didn't matter what culture, it was cultures that were removed from the modern world. And so I was in LA and I was, working in the film industry and I was doing other stuff, teaching creative writing, but I dropped everything and I took my backpack and my camera gear and I took off to Asia, to remote Asia, and I started spending time with the tribes. So really my journey started as a means of self-exploration, to be with people who haven't forgotten the old ways. I'm very attracted to ancient traditions. I've always been so. And so it started off in that way, but then the most natural progression was to take pictures of them and to document their lives. And so photography and videography was really the side thing that came out of it, but the journey started as a means of self-exploration.
Wow, I love that. I have, okay, genuine questions, lots of genuine questions here. One, how did you, I'm trying to imagine in my head, traveling across the world and going to a community and kind of coming in with a backpack and being like, hey guys, I'm going to spend some time with you. I'm so curious to hear about what that process was like. What did you feel? How did you kind of experience integration into that culture? I mean, the first thing that comes to my head is I took an anthropology class in college. So I just thought that was super fascinating because that part of our assignments was to immerse ourselves into cultures and communities that we otherwise wouldn't be in. And I remember that being just a really cool thing. But of course I had here's the syllabus and I'm supposed to be here. So, hey guys, I'm going to spend some time with you. But how did you go about that? And how did you feel? And how were you kind of accepted into their communities?
Yeah, that's a great question because initially there was a lot of stumbling. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no plan at all. I didn't know how I was going to go about it. But really, I didn't know what to share with them. I didn't know if it was okay to give them money if they asked for it. I didn't know if it was okay to let them know that I had thousands of dollars of camera gear in my backpack. Was it unsafe? What could I share? What could I not share? But over time, I had to start dropping boundaries because of the way things unfolded. And once I started to drop boundaries, I was invited in, and it was really the women. It was the women who took me in and they protected me and they took care of me, and I learned so much from them. So being alone, being a solo woman traveling with my backpack, being coming into a community so vulnerable, that was my entry point. It wasn't planned. It just became naturally. The women were like, who is this person and what is she doing here by herself? And so my communication points became the women, and I started to spend a lot of time with them, and that sort of expanded. So that was how it started.
Wow. And what about the language barrier?
Yeah, so I started off in India just because I speak Hindi. And so even though the tribes didn't speak Hindi, there was always this one local kid somewhere in the tribe that spoke some language that was sort of similar to mine. And so I always found those local kids to help me or to translate and just come around with me and make things easier. And it was very interesting to do that from both sides because we both learned a lot about each other. And I also saw that when you bring the kids in, they are automatically curious about their own traditions, which they otherwise are trying to not embrace anymore because the youth around the world, they're all trying to go toward the modern West. But then when they see people from outside come and show curiosity about their culture, then they want to learn that too. But I digress. The point is I would find local people to someone who would speak a similar language in the beginning. Um, in places like Indonesia and Myanmar, it was very hard to communicate initially. There was no way really, but eventually I learned that and it sounds pretty far-fetched, but I didn't actually have to use words to communicate with a lot of the people. So you
Hmm.
start to like just connect on a different level.
I love that. That sounds so fun. Okay, so why don't we, because I know when we connected offline, one of the most interesting pieces for me that we were discussing was just the idea of gender roles and, duality versus non-duality, and how that compares to the Western world. And then that's a theme that I think is really important for every culture to be aware of, because sometimes we just get so caught up in the way that we live in society that we don't understand that there are people in the same earth that we live on who live on completely different terms, for better or for worse. It doesn't make a difference. It's just different, um, without assigning any kind of meaning to it. So I'd love to hear from you, your experiences speaking with these Indigenous women, experiencing them in their natural environments and the way that they interact with their male counterparts, or how that just kind of worked for you, especially because that has been the focus of all of your work, capturing those experiences and those kinds of themes. So I'd love for you to take it away and kind of talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So please interrupt me anytime because I might get really
Yeah.
deep into some of the stories, feel free to. So non-duality became one of the themes of the travels because I was born in Mumbai, which is a very sort of, metropolitan kind of place. And then I came to LA. And in a lot of these places, in these big cities, we're taught to not trust strangers and have these like boundaries and have to speak with people in a certain way and not share certain things. And when I went into these villages and these remote places, what I saw was how simple they are. There's so much simplicity. There's not constant calculation in everything you're doing, right? And it's just a very simple way of living. And so I was constantly seeing non-duality everywhere. And it's the term for it in Sanskrit is Advaita, and it's something that you can't really explain scientifically. It's not something you can explain, but it's something you can experience. And so I can't describe it, but I kept seeing it everywhere in their interaction with their animals, with their land. I was in British Columbia. As a part of this masterclass teaching filmmaking masterclass course, teaching indigenous people kids how to make films basically about their own cultures. And I met this medicine woman, very, very elderly medicine woman. Um, and she was, she saw me, she was picking herbs, and I asked her what she was doing. And she started to tell me the names of the herbs and all their, what they were for. And I was so fascinated that I was like, wow, she shared with me that she was going into the forest the next day because she wanted to pick more herbs. And I asked her if I could come with her, you know,
Hmm.
and she was like, yeah, absolutely. So, she said, we'll meet me at the end of that hill. She was like, meet me at the end of that hill tomorrow evening and we'll go together. And I was like, well, I'm flying off to Vancouver tomorrow evening. Can we go in the morning? And she looked at me appalled. She was like, I had said something very, very wrong. And she was like, we don't, we can't go in the morning. The morning is when the bears and the wolves, they go berry picking, and they go, it's the forest is theirs. And when they're done in the evening, the forest is ours. And it's such a simple thing, but it created such a massive shift in me because I had never thought to think that animals have their time and that I should be respecting that, you know. Um, I mean, I live in Topanga and I have mountain lions and bobcats in my backyard, but I'm still not aware of their time and like when I'm allowed to go hiking or not, because but they are so aware of it. It's so natural for them when someone asks them, "Can we go in the morning?" It's like a big shock to them that someone else would ask something like that. So, and I've seen this over and over in India too, when you see these women with their buffaloes picking up this gigantic cow dung with their hands so lovingly and so like naturally, and putting it into these little baskets, because cow dung is a very big source of biofuel in the villages. It's a part of, it's like uh it's a fertilizer. They also, so you know, they use it for so many purposes. They don't look at it as something that's disgusting. So there you have the buffalo dropping it, and then here she comes with her basket and she picks it up lovingly with her hands. And just over and over, all these things that I was seeing was really fascinating for me. um yeah, yeah, I could go on, but you know,
Yeah,
it's
I
like,
mean,
yeah,
I think the theme that you're kind of bringing up that I'm taking away from this is just the idea of being integrated into your natural environment, respecting it. We don't, I feel like, I mean, I live in Manhattan. I have very little access to natural environments unless I, you know, go across the river on either side. But, you know, we often in these metropolitan areas like Mumbai and LA and New York, like most people who are, you know, kind of in those environments don't feel like they maybe don't have an opportunity in some ways, because we don't have to go pick berries, we get it delivered through our fresh direct, or we don't have to go and search for, you know, this particular herb in the forest. It's in the grocery store across the street, right? If it's in season. But the point is that I think the piece that's really important here is to understand that we do live in a natural environment, and that there is a natural environment also outside of us, that's outside of our communities perhaps, and there are people who actually integrate with them, respect them, and live so harmoniously. And that is where we kind of get all of our stuff here too, right? Everything that
right.
we get delivered to our homes and, you know, these trucks and Amazon boxes, often these are like those materials are coming from these kinds of locations, where people actually really love their environment and live very
Right,
harmoniously with it.
right. Absolutely.
I love
Yes,
it.
very much so. So yeah, it's really, really beautiful. And it's, I think it's very important for us to remember this, because we all have it within us. We grew, you know, our ancestors lived like this, but we've forgotten it. And it's really impacting the environment. It's impacting us as well, because we are all so interconnected, and we've forgotten that because we live so removed from these lands, that I feel like it's important for us to remember this. And that's why I share these stories and these photographs and these, you know, document these things, because it's something of essence and it could come back, you know. Another thing that I've seen a lot with communities in the women is the sense of community. You know, it's something again that we've forgotten. It's like we're going more toward isolation. But when you look at the women, indigenous women in all these different remote cultures, there is this massive sense of sisterhood and community, which now feels so far-fetched, because there's so many different tribes. There was this one common thing, which was when someone lost a child in childbirth, or there was some sort of major tragedy that happened in a woman's life, the entire tribe of women would come together and mourn for 7 days or so. And so the woman was never in her grief alone. And women really do need that sense of community. So seeing that, and just seeing how these indigenous women show up for each other is also very, very inspiring. They don't only share their grief, they also share their successes. And I think these are all the things that are within us that we could just try to remember and bring back, because there's so much mental illnesses right now, and a lot of these, the root cause of all of this is the fact that we have forgotten our roots and who we really are, and we're going toward a world that is more toward isolation. So there's a lot to learn from these people in that
Yeah.
sense.
One thing that actually I thought of when you just mentioned like losing a child, or have just in the experience of childbirth for women. I'm a pelvic floor physical therapist, so I treat a lot of people around the pregnancy and postpartum period. And one of the biggest things that we are talking about is postpartum depression and making sure that we're referring appropriately. And working in Manhattan for so many years, it's as much as we have lots of different kind of support groups or different kinds of ways that people can connect through social media and the internet, it still can be very isolating at times, because you live in these very small apartments with just your partner and a newborn, for example. And you don't have that family support. You don't have these joint family living styles. Parents might come to visit for a day, they stay in a hotel. I see this very often, and they come just play with the baby, and there's not as much people might hire a baby nurse or hire nannies to help give that kind of support, but it's more of like a transactional, I'm paying you for your time to get a job done sort of a thing, while I'm at work. So based on that, I mean, this sounds like it's so different. The communities that you work with, and the communities that you've spent time with seem to have like literally the opposite experience, right? So I'd love for you to maybe share a little bit about that. And also, on the line of postpartum depression too, part of it can be because of that lack of support and that lack of community, and the lack of feeling like they have somebody to lean on as well. So I'd love
Yeah.
for you to touch on those elements based on what you've seen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Right now, I'm filming a documentary on these women, gypsy women in Western India. They're not really gypsy; they're a wandering tribe, but they call themselves gypsies. So they are a tribe of women who basically changed an entire patriarchal structure of their society into a matriarchy simply by embracing this dance. And what I've seen in staying with them and filming them is that these women are dancers. They're very, very successful dancers. They live in poverty, but that's a whole other story. That's a whole governmental thing, because about non-untouchables and all that stuff still exists, the classism, which is ridiculous. But the thing is, the people abroad, the people outside of India, have recognized their talent, and so these women travel around the world. They have passports filled with stamps. They come back to live in tarp tents, and they have no running water or electricity. But when I asked them how it felt to be performing in Paris and in Washington, D.C., and being so honored, and then coming back to a place, to a country where its people didn't even consider them humans, where the government didn't give them any land. And what they said was, this is our home, this is our family. And when we're performing there, we just can't wait to come back home and make chapati and feed our families and feed my husband and my cousins. And so community is so big among these people that when one of the women of the tribe goes on stage and she performs, and she is the celebrity, she's whirling, and she comes back home to a tribe. She does not come back home to a husband and a child. She comes back home to a tribe, which means that all the money that she has made in that performance is immediately distributed to uncles and aunties and little kids coming and asking, Didi, Didi, like, give me something. And so, like I was saying earlier, they don't only share their grief, but they also share their successes. Literally, it's like everything is circulated within the entire tribe. So it's not that one person rises to the top, it's everybody gets that energy. And for me, this was like, I have chills when I talk about this, because this is not how I grew up thinking. I grew up in
Yeah.
Mumbai, now I live in LA. You don't do that. Like, if you
Mm-mm.
are the one who's dancing, you're the one who keeps the money. But no, no. they live this way. And so what happens is they bring the whole tribe up together, you know, and it's phenomenal because this one woman, they used to be snake charmers, these people, and a lot of things happened. The government passed the Wildlife Protection Act, and they couldn't be snake charmers anymore. And one of the women took up a dance, and she was, spotted by someone. She came to the United States. She performed. She became famous. Immediately, the other women caught up to this success. They all learned the dance, and they like now the dance is on UNESCO's list of intangible heritage, and their
Wow.
tribe is on the world map. So the thing is, they don't just keep the successes to themselves, they truly distribute their success throughout the tribe. And wow, this is it's a lesson. It's a lesson
Yeah.
in there, somewhere in there, you know.
I mean, I completely understand because I grown up in an Indian household where it's, male, female counterparts and families. And, I completely understand that this is exactly the opposite in lots of ways, even if it's from the same
Yeah.
country. But typically, like a Hindu Indian household is a very patriarchal household, typically, not
Yeah.
always, but typically.
Yeah.
So I can imagine growing up in that kind of a household and then seeing these women, um, kind of just integrating and sharing everything, and being able to lift each other up too. We don't see that a lot in the West. We don't.
No,
It-
you don't see that anywhere. Most of the places, and what I learned is that the reason they're like this is because nobody has accepted them, right? So they're not accepted by society, which means they don't have to follow any societal norms. They have
Mhm.
created rules for themselves.
Yeah.
There's no authority. There's a lot to learn from this,
Yeah.
but please continue.
Well, I'd like to actually hear more about the matriarchy and how does that, like, very specifically, what did you experience? I'm sure there's small interactions and just the way that people behave or kind of interact with one another, that makes it a matriarchy. And how is that different from other communities or other tribes that you've seen who maybe do have a strong male leader, and
Yeah.
do have, like, maybe it's still a very integrated community where everyone still shares and lifts each other up, but what is the difference between having kind of that female predominant leadership versus male counterparts?
Yeah, I mean, just think about it. In a lot of places in India, you still have female infanticide because, having a girl child is a little bit of a burden on the family because the girl won't earn or she needs to be married, and so they need to have money. There's a lot of things involved. And so a lot of places in many parts of India, even today, are very patriarchal societies where the woman does not have too much freedom. And so this tribe of women, like they practiced female infanticide for centuries, and it was when the women took up the dance and the woman was spotted and taken abroad and she performed. What happened is the woman started to bring in the money for the family, so now the woman became the person, the main, they couldn't kill the girl anymore. They didn't need to kill the girl anymore because the girl brought in the money. The mother was now the mother was able to support the children, the mother was able to educate the children. So what happens is that the men stay at home while the women travel the world performing. That doesn't happen in a lot of rural places in India and a lot of villages where, and so this particular tribe is such a uh, what's the word for it? Irony, no, paradox. It's such a paradox because they still veil, they still practice veiling in front of their in-laws and stuff, but they travel the world, they bring in the money, the girl child isn't killed anymore. They make the decisions in the family, and often the men come and stay at the woman's house, so it's very different, but it's not like they are rude to their husbands. They lift their husbands, so these women who started to perform abroad started to take their husbands with them to do the drums or the bean or like some sort of instrument. So it was the women who were lifting their husbands, and so it's a very beautiful relationship. But it's the woman does have the upper hand. She is the one traveling everywhere, she's the one bringing in the money, she's the one educating, she's the one buying herself and her family a home. She's the one uplifting her husband, she's the one giving him exposure. And so what happens is they have a lot of freedom. So that's the thing that I've noticed in this tribe. But I mean, you know, I wouldn't. There's another tribe in Myanmar. This is kind of a sad story, but so back in the day, they used to be the Kayan women used to be given these brass rings. You might have seen these women in
Mhm.
Thailand, the ring-necked women, right? They're also called the giraffe women, which is such a derogatory term, but they used to have these rings given to
To
them to
elongate
give
their neck, right?
to
Yeah.
to give them the appearance of an elongated neck to make them feel more beautiful. That's one of the stories. There's
Yeah.
many other stories as well. um, and what happened is during the civil war, this tribe of people had to flee to Thailand, northern Thailand, and then they were kept there. But they were almost like slaves. They couldn't
Mm.
travel the rest of Thailand because they were refugees. And then these women were sort of forced to like pose for photographs with tourists and stuff. So a big part of this industry that's happening in northern Thailand is actually not an ethical tourism industry. It's not the women are not treated well. They really don't have much freedom.
Mm.
And so, what happened not so long ago is that some of these women found a way to escape and go back to their land in Myanmar, in Loiko. And they they've created their whole world there from scratch. So they escaped and they created this little village in Loiko, which looks a lot like this village in Thailand, but on their own accord. So now their daughters, they wear these rings, but they're the ones that can be snapped open. So they
Mm.
can still have tourists coming in and taking pictures, but nobody's being oppressed. So,
Mm.
and the women are excellent weavers, and so they weave and they really have taken their own, like, control of their lives. It's beautiful. I really admire them. I'm not sure. I don't know too much about this tribe in the sense that I don't know if it's a matriarchy, but I know that the women did take back control of their lives. The ones who escaped and the ones who are creating their own community back in their homeland, they have really changed everything. They bring in the money, they do a lot of weaving and everything in a very healthy way. And then their daughters, they have decided that their daughters won't be wearing those ring necks anymore, but they do. It's beautiful how they easily adapt to the situation and they use it to their advantage, but not in a bad way. They're just doing what needs to be done, right, in a way that they still have authority. So there's a lot of tribes of women around the world that are doing that now, which is that they're taking up control of their own lives. It's very, very resilient and very admirable.
I love that story. That's really beautiful. And I'm happy to hear that, they were kind of able to parallel and take aspects of their life from the past that made sense to them. Like you said, what's relevant, what's appropriate, but then kind of blend in with the times and what their needs are. Um,
Right.
so what is your most interesting experience in terms of your, creating your documentary or um, in terms of your actual filmmaking? What was your most interesting experience, maybe interacting with one of the tribal women or one of the members of the community?
Are you talking about my documentary with the Gypsy women of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
India?
Yeah.
The most interesting experience was the first time I ever saw them, which was way, way, many, many years ago. And it was really the first month of my travels. And I saw these women, and they were walking the streets barefoot, and that they had these bangles all the way to their shoulders, and they were wearing red, and they looked so powerful in their strides. And I just looked at them, and I was like, how do I be that? How do I be like that? How can where do they get this power from? Who are these people? And and I went up and I asked them if I could take a photograph of them. I didn't know back then, like, I didn't know anything back then. It was my first month, and you don't just walk up to people and take photographs because that's really objectifying them. But I didn't know better then. And and I met them, and they started to laugh, and I was so intimidated by them. And I remember my initial experience with them just like struck me, and I knew that I had a long way to go. I knew that, and it was phenomenal. The way they were, the way they talk to each other, and the way they yell, and their voice is projected out. And for some reason, this has been one of my dearest experiences because they laughed at me and I wasn't deterred by that. I just knew that I wanted to be like them, or I wanted to be a part of whatever they were. And thus became my my search for all these different Indigenous women. And then henceforth, everywhere I went, all these remote cultures that I went to, the women were the women were just as powerful. Oh, I have a quick story actually. There's this, which is, I'm digressing again,
Yeah.
but I was hiking to Gangotri, which is a spiritually significant glacier because it's where the river Ganga flows from, and I had like my North Face jacket and my Columbia pants and my Columbia hiking boots and my, all these brands. I had these perfect backpacks and like everything was perfect because it was a very long journey for me. I was doing a way longer walk from a little bit further away, and I was hiking and I, along the way. So this is a glacier at 4,000 meters, or am I? Yeah, I think it's either 4,000. Yeah, around 4,000 meters above sea level, and it's snowing there. And there were women walking along the same road in saris and slippers or sandals. And they walked all the way to Gangotri, to the glacier,
Wow.
and in a sari, in a flimsy sari and sandals. And I was so struck by the simplicity of this. So actually, this is nothing to do with my documentary, but this would be one moment which was so fascinating for me. We don't need all these things that a lot of us have in order to get somewhere that feels like a very rugged place, because the human body is just so resilient. And I also saw the power of faith, because really it's snowing, it's negative degrees, and I could be wrong. I need to fact check. It could be 4,000 meters, 4,600 or 6,000. I'm not sure. It's a big difference, but um, just the fact that they were able to do this entire walk and hike in their saris and sandals made me rethink a lot of things that I had believed in most of my life. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
that
bet. Also because we live in such a environment and a culture where we're all very product driven. There's always stuff all the time. We
right.
have so much stuff, multiple kinds of the same stuff. um,
Yeah,
but I can imagine
right.
that that was just maybe humbling in some ways. Like, oh
It was
wow.
so humbling. It was so humbling because, I'd gone to REI and I was like, tell me, I'm going on this big journey. Tell me the best backpack to have. And they gave me all the functions of these backpacks and, everything, pants, everything has functions. And then you watch these women in sandals walking these like rugged, very, very rugged terrain. And you're like, wow, it's just very, very humbling.
Yeah. And also this is a pitched, I don't recommend highly that everybody goes and walks in the snow at negative degrees right now, but it just kind of shows how, like
Yeah,
you said, faith and community and kind of doing something together, the morale of it all can really push
yeah,
somebody to go
I
beyond what
agree.
their physical limits are and their mind
Right,
over matter,
right.
really cool. Okay. So to kind of bring this all together, I'd love for you to share, based on all of the research and all of your experiences and the process of creating this documentary, how do you feel like you can apply some of these concepts and some of these ways of living into our communities here in the West, especially in places that are big cities, that maybe don't have access as much to the natural environment? But what kind of themes do you feel like we can at least think about and integrate in some ways, shapes and forms into our own lives?
I think that because we're so removed, we tend to forget how much we are one with the environment around us. And this is something we might want to remind ourselves every single day. And these are such simple things, like when you go to a restaurant and they give you a straw for water. You make sure that you ask for water and you immediately refuse the straw so they don't bring stuff. The thing is that um, there's a lot of things that are being thrown at us that we don't need. And it's so to think about the environment on an everyday basis and see what we're doing that is not helping. It would be a very simple way to start. To simplify our lives would be another way to be very kind to the earth, because there's nowhere, we think that the trash is going into a trash, but the trash is not really going anywhere, right? There's nowhere. There's no I threw it away, but there's no away. It's still on our planet. And so living sustainably in that sense, like seeing where we're sourcing our materials from, and you know reducing the usage of plastic, and all these basic things can help a lot, because when I've gone to these remote places, they don't use any of this stuff. They live very simply. They don't have plastics and stuff like that. At least the places that I went to that were really removed, just lived very simply. And so when we simplify our lives in that sense, and also be very cognizant of all the stuff that we're consuming and on an everyday basis, and asking ourselves, is this good for the environment? And not go crazy about it, but whatever we can avoid would be great. And another thing I have learned is that while yes, it's very good for us to have boundaries, and almost required in the modern West, or just the contemporary world, also to recognize that inherently people are very good. And when people act in certain ways, it's really their own pains speaking. And so what I learned, the biggest thing that I learned, is that we truly are all one. We truly are very, very interconnected. And um, to just be aware of that, and to just have that love, which these remote cultures, they're just so open. And we don't want to be vulnerable at the same time, but to just recognize that there is this inherent oneness, and everything we do is affecting everybody and everything else. I think that would be, yeah, my biggest takeaways from my journeys.
I love that. That's so beautifully said. I really wish I could see every single clip that you've ever taken, all the B-roll and like the small pieces, because I can visualize like in my head as you're telling stories about the bear and the lady going to the forest and the women dancing and approaching them in the mountains. Like I can visualize all these things, but I just imagine how rich it actually looks in person. And just, taking all of those images and those experiences, I'm sure that is probably like the best thing that's ever happened, to be able to have that experience in life. And I'm sure
Yeah.
you'll pass it down and, touch so many people's lives with the documentary. I can't wait to see it. When does it come
Thank
out?
you. Thank you. I'm hoping in April, around April, but I'll keep you posted on that as well.
Amazing. April 2022. So we'll keep
Yeah.
an eye out for it, and we'll definitely put a little shout out on our IG page as well when it does come out.
Great.
Um,
Thank you.
of course. Thank you so much, Sage. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us or add today?
That's it. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Of
having me.
course. My pleasure.